Hey everyone, in January of 2023 it was leaked that Bubba would be getting removed from the game. Despite this leak gaining a lot of traction however, and many believing Bubba to really be leaving the game in a similar way to that of Stranger Things, this never actually ended up happening. Allegedly, the reason behind this rumour is that this was a false leak intended to catch out a leaker. It was confirmed false by Behaviour themselves, with a tweet about Bubba definitely staying in the realm, squashing the rumours completely. This misconception came about after Bubba's perks had been found in the game files with altered titles reminiscent of other licenses, non-licensed designs. For example, Bill's set of perks had icons that do not feature him, as at one point he was only on PC and not console. The same goes for something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. When Stranger Things left, a similar thing happened too, although in the case of Bubba we didn't have the icons altered, but it was leaked that Bubba's perk names were changed to have an additional part at the end saying Name Alt, suggesting an alternate name would soon be implemented for them, yet to be decided. This, along with alternate perk descriptions, suggested to be removing the Bubba referencing parts. All of this was unfinished however. This seemed to line up well too with the release of the upcoming Texas Chainsaw Massacre game at the time, the assumption being that Bubba was getting pulled due to the license getting its own game. In July of 2022, Stranger Things was rumoured to return back before it actually did return in November of 2023. Not only this, but there was supposedly a new map planning to be released, the Rainbow Room, in an alternate version of Hawkins' Lab. There were further rumours that Vecna would be releasing alongside it as a Stranger Things Part 2 chapter. The Stranger Things Vecna, not the Vecna we have. It's all very confusing, isn't it? On the DBD Leaks channel we even saw some gameplay of the map, which did clearly have a different layout to that of the original Hawkins map, and with them tweeting out that Stranger Things would not only be returning, but there would be a second Stranger Things chapter too. It all seemed pretty real, but it ended up being fake, with Stranger Things not returning until over a year later, in November of 2023, and being officially announced. The whole thing is quite strange however, as it doesn't seem like it was made up by the leakers. They did find it, the map quite clearly is there, and so the idea of a second chapter would seem reasonable too. Maybe it was scrapped, maybe it was simply unused assets from before, or something entirely different, but for whatever reason, these things appeared, I think, in the game files, so that the leakers could access them. Perhaps it was very early work for the license's eventual return, or possibly there was going to be a chapter 2, but it just never came to fruition. A misconception that occurred in September of 2022 was the rumour that the killer for chapter 26 would be a night character, which it was, but there was more to this, with it being rumoured to be a For Honor crossover. It was rumoured to be both a night character, along with a map inspired by the For Honor universe. What was weird about these leaks however was that there wasn't much clarity of if this chapter was directly a license from For Honor and characters from the game, or if it was simply inspired by For Honor. This is where there was lots of confusion. It ultimately ended up not being a For Honor or For Honor inspired chapter at all, but instead being entirely original, the only similarity being that the killer was in fact a knight. What was strange however was that a Dead by Daylight For Honor crossover did end up happening, except us DBD players sort of got the short end of the stick, with us simply getting a Night Helm charm. For Honor got a whole elaborate event with Trapper crossing over into that universe and acting almost as a boss in a special game mode. So whilst this was a case of a rumour not being entirely untrue, it certainly wasn't completely grounded in reality either. The whole thing was a big misconception. Five Nights at Freddy's was rumoured to be coming to the game, but far before its official announcement in the summer of 2024. That still sounds really weird to say, by the way, the fact it's actually coming. The most traction one of these misconceptions got was around the release of Chapter 21. When we received this trailer in August, it showed a TV or monitor, panned up to the static, and an unclear image on the TV. In the corner there was text that stated 1987. This to many was received as a Five Nights at Freddy teaser, due to the monitor possibly referencing the security cameras and monitor setup that you have in the games. The static referencing maybe the fact that the security guard is dead, I don't know, and the 1987 referencing the Bite of 87, a famous event within the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. In reality, this was a trailer for Hellraiser, with this actually just being almost a direct reference to a scene in the original Hellraiser, which was released in 1987. People really defended this Five Nights at Freddy's theory though, to the very last minute, until being directly told by Behaviour themselves that this was a Hellraiser chapter. Many even went so far to claim that they had done it on purpose purpose to make people more hyped for the chapter by baiting it as Five Nights at Freddy's. But I mean, come on, it's literally just a scene from the film. Trickster had an interesting misconception arise from his original teaser trailer. Well, debatably the teasers were more focused on his chapter counterpart Jin, but one of them was more Trickster focused, and regardless, people still thought it was about the killer. Released in February 2021, this teaser had a recording of Trickster's music being played, so many considered it possible it was a music-related character. However, where a big misconception arose was with the rewind in the middle of the track. The rewind button is pressed, the track resets and plays again. Many took this to mean we were getting some kind of time-bending character, or someone able to rewind time. It seems silly looking back on it, and I'm not entirely sure why the rewind is here, but it was greatly theorized to be a killer able to manipulate time in some form from this teaser. The other theory, and not really misconception, was that he was just going to be a failed SoundCloud rapper, which is quite a good one. Which is, I don't know, I've always found that quite funny. Moving on to February 2023, with the release of the teaser trailer for Chapter 27, after this teaser it was suggested that the killer of this chapter was going to be a cyborg of some kind. I believe we did have the name leaked too at this point, which was the Skull Merchant. And so the dark visuals of the trailer, the mechanical plans, drilling noises, and teched out skull, it was assumed to be a cyborg of some kind. People were so convinced of this in fact that it was practically being spread around like it was a fact, especially with a name like Tools of Torment, with its futuristic lettering. Of course, this ended up simply being the Skull Merchant, a character based on dark manga and having little in the way of futuristic tech. It was only when the actual image of the Spotlight trailer was revealed that the theory was dropped down the drain and replaced with something the majority of the player base didn't like. It was this whole big moment, everyone was hyped for a cyborg, and then this image leaked, and everything just fell apart. Oh, that was a crazy day. Crazy PTB. Yeah. What was crazy with Skull Merchant is that there was actually sort of a part 2 to her whole misconception, which was the reason she was poorly designed, and this was that the reason she was poorly designed was down to her being the product of a failed Predator license, which she isn't by the way, as we know today. This was theorized due to a few of her features aligning with that of Predator, for example the dual blades, the 3 dots around survivors affected by claw traps, and of course a tracking based power which used skulls, and the claiming of them. It's really not a very good theory when you look into it, but it does have some passing coincidences that many bought into. An odd occurrence way back in 2020 was one which occurred with the release of the teaser for the A Binding of Kin chapter. The teaser was simply titled Chapter 19 at the time. However, in this trailer we were in some woods, we could hear a growl of some kind, and something running rapidly, with a hand coming up at the very end. A big theory at the time, and the leading one, was that twins were a Left 4 Dead witch, or this chapter's killer would be, as we didn't know the name yet. If you didn't know, witches in Left 4 Dead stay incredibly still and lightly cry, and will run rapidly at you and apply considerable damage if they're disturbed by either a noise or direct injury. It was an odd one to be theorized as the killer due to this being the way witches work. I'm not quite sure how that would have worked as a power. It was considered possible as Left 4 Dead had been added to the game previously with Bill and the outfits for the original 4. Bill was released as just a survivor, so adding a killer later on down the line did sort of make some sense. Really though, this theory primarily relied on the evidence we had for it being a witch, being the scream, the speedy movement, and claw-like looking thing at the end. This of course was later revealed to be Victor, an interesting misconception for sure, but again one people bought into quite a lot. Let's now look at something a little different. In January of 2024, it was revealed that some kind of mystery box was coming to the game. The first thought of many was that this was going to be a loot box system of some kind, due to the image we got with it. This one was rumored to be a possible loot box system also because of the mobile version of the game having one. They were leaked as being loot boxes and special packs, both of which are common terms for things that essentially sound like gambling. Luckily, these ended up simply being packs of cosmetics being sold together in the new store update. The mystery box feature was also simply a free weekly login reward, essentially, that you could claim within the shop, and typically rewards you with about 300,000 blood points. One big hint to who the killer of the 4th year anniversary chapter was hidden inside of the 4 in the artwork. It was shaped like a pyramid, and ended up being a Silent Hill chapter with Pyramid Head. When the next year rolled around, a large misconception arose around the 5th year anniversary artwork. Many believed it to be the same case as the year before, with the shape of the 5 seeming suspicious suspicious and potentially hinting toward a character. The two leading theories were either Candyman with his hook being referenced, or a Resident Evil chapter with the Dimitrescu daughters from the newest Resident Evil game, Village. Admittedly too, the weapon did sort of align with one of the daughters. Despite all this, it did not end up being any of the daughters who came to the game, but it was a Resident Evil chapter. It was just that the artwork had nothing at all to do with what the chapter was. It was just a 5. So in this case, this misconception was sort of partly right, even if the evidence to get to that conclusion was completely misguided. It was actually a Resident Evil chapter. In October and November of 2022, there was a leak for the chapter after next, Chapter 23. Both the artist and Jonah had already been leaked for Chapter 22, but Chapter 23 was also supposedly leaked and said to be The Conjuring. This was due to the Eyrie of Crows map being leaked. For whatever reason though, it was presumed that this wasn't a map for Chapter 22, but instead the map for Chapter 23, and a graveyard specifically referencing The Conjuring, with the killer speculated to be the nun. To be fair, the map was only partially visible in the leaks and was far from complete, so this misconception was fairly reasonable to get confused, especially as Chapter 22 would not come to the PTB for a couple weeks still after this leak. I couldn't actually remember why it was assumed to be The Conjuring in particular, but I think it was because one of the tiles on the new map was named Mausoleum. Let me know, by the way, any misconceptions you can remember too from DBD history. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.